Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. Ghislaine Maxwell did not kill herself. Wait, I jumped the gun there a little bit premature. I'm sure that comes later, though. Well, if you didn't know by now, Ghislaine Maxwell, the lady of the house for Epstein's pedophile island, she's been found guilty on 5 of the 6 counts against her. And as a result, she could be looking at some serious time in prison. Jury's still out on whether or not she's going to get that one. But the interesting thing happens to be that this happened in such short order at all. This wasn't some years-long saga. You know, like when Epstein was originally sent to jail after he pleaded guilty to solicitation of prostitution with a minor. He only served 18 months in jail for that, but as we all know, apparently the sheriff felt particularly solicitous towards Epstein and let the guy go to his home most of the time. He only had to check into jail to sleep there. Apparently that sheriff runs a bed and breakfast on the side, I guess. And they let him go 5 months early, so he barely served a year. The feds didn't want for Jeffrey Epstein to go to prison. Instead, they preferred, it seems, that he go to an early grave. Allegedly. So there's no question whatsoever that there was all manner of irregularities with the Epstein case. But before we go too far with it, as I've chronicled for you many times, Jeffrey Epstein is not some special case. It doesn't matter if it's Brock Turner or whomever. If you've got the complexion for the protection, rape charges don't seem to stick. About the only hope in hell that you have of putting somebody with the right skin color in prison for rape is if there is an enormous hue and cry from the public. But short of that, well, there just isn't enough to get them on. Or in the case of Brock Turner, why, this young rapist has his whole life ahead of him. Why, how is he supposed to look for his next victim, date, if he's in a prison cell? The entire reason that Jeffrey Epstein got as much attention as he did is because of the fact that there's so many rich and powerful white men who he was bumping elbows with and did business with all the time. Actors, scientists, politicians, princes, and presidents. And that being the case, there was a lot of curiosity, and rightly so, about who the hell else was going down to Pedophile Island with them. The government was obviously protecting him, and the white media made it their business to look the other way. Better yet, let's go ahead and bring up some dirt about Bill Cosby, about Michael Jackson, about the man on the moon. As long as it's a black man, it's not a white one, that's all that really matters. So when the feds turned off the cameras at Jeffrey Epstein's prison and then had him bumped off, when there was a mechanical failure with the cameras at Epstein's prison and he just so happened to conveniently choose that moment to kill himself, nothing mysterious here, nothing is all above board. Epstein's unfortunate murder, suicide, left the feds with the idea that at least, if nothing else, there won't be anyone who can directly connect all of his allegedly felonious pals to Pedophile Island. Well, except for one small problem, the public outcry didn't go away because of how dirty this clearly was. Somebody was going to have to be fed to the public in order to make them feel as if someone had gone down for it, and that's where Ghislaine Maxwell came in. Not to say that she's not guilty, she is. But let's not look at this as anything other than what it is. This was all about making sure there would be a nice cathartic ending to this story. Well, you couldn't get Jeffrey Epstein, and you won't be able to get all the rich and powerful white men that he was hobnobbing with, so you can go ahead and have his white woman instead. That'll be enough. At least you got a pound of flesh from somebody. It's a meaningless pound of flesh, but a pound of flesh nonetheless. Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't a big fish, and she was not as important as Jeffrey Epstein. Sure, she was his accomplice. She certainly knew what the hell was going on, but unless Epstein was inviting her in while he was doing threesomes with whatever rich and powerful white men he had over at Pedophile Island, even accusations from Ghislaine Maxwell would have had limited impact at best. That's not me being cynical, that's just me being bluntly honest. Seriously. Did anyone actually expect that Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and Prince Andrews and all those other well-heeled, powerful perverts were going to be made to do the perp walk on this one? Only an idiot would believe that Ghislaine Maxwell's word alone would be sufficient to do anything other than create gossip at best, which the white media would do what they do with a lot of stories. They would explain why the public's wrong and Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself, remember that. About the only way that Ghislaine Maxwell was going to be a threat at all is if she could produce some damning evidence of some sort. And I'll tell you right now, it's not really known what evidence she might have had at her home regarding Pedophile Island, but whatever it was, it's guaranteed that the feds have long since found it and no doubt disposed of it. This wasn't a trial so much as it was a political judicial PR exercise. This is how the white media operates, through false narratives. And the narrative here is going to be Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, quote unquote. He's no longer a threat. No longer able to be punished. So we're going to make sure that his little partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, goes down for this. It's a lie, this idea that, well, we can't go after these other rich and powerful men unless Ghislaine Maxwell rolls over on them. That's a lie. I can tell you right now, if Jeffrey Epstein's name was Jeffrey Jenkins, they wouldn't need anyone's word to go after him. Hell, they didn't need anybody's word to go after Bill Cosby. The last time I checked, Bill Cosby's not a president or a prince. This trial should have at least had a little bit of white media hyperbole on it. The trial of a century. Will she or won't she talk? Now the white media was managing expectations. It was all about what did she know and how could she have looked the other way. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and minimize this. Same way that they do when it comes to talking about crime in general. If it's black people they're talking about, it's racially pathologized. If it's a black defendant, well, it's not the black defendant on trial, it's the black community. What's wrong with the black community? If it's a white defendant, well, it's just this one isolated case here. The Miami Herald is the white media outlet largely credited with blowing the Epstein story wide open. And in their coverage, they reported that the U.S. Attorney's Office had agreed with Epstein's attorneys not to notify his victims that the feds were giving him a slap on the wrist. By federal law, they have to notify the victims whenever they're going to be doing something like this. You can't just do it and tell them afterwards, but that's exactly what they did. And no one got in any trouble for this. Are we supposed to believe that the feds temporarily forgot what the law was? The Herald quotes one former federal prosecutor as saying, "I have never heard of a case where federal prosecutors consult with the defense attorney before they send out standard victim notification letters. To negotiate what the letters would say and whether they would be sent at all suggests that the victim's rights were violated multiple times." That's what they were doing. The U.S. Attorney's Office was doing with Epstein's attorneys. So, okay, we're not going to let these victims know that we're going to go ahead and basically let you go. And we'll let you guys write up the release, and you'll go ahead and tell us what you want for it to say. This is not some lobbyist on Capitol Hill talking to corrupt members of Congress. This is the U.S. Attorney's Office, supposed to be the Justice Department. We don't see nothing but injustice here, don't we? And by the way, that former U.S. attorney, what a joke. That first part that he said he'd never heard of prosecutors consulting with defense attorneys on how to violate a victim's rights. Well, as black people, we see it all the time. Whenever you got one of these racists with a badge who harms a black person, then the DAs will be bending over backwards in open public, making sure everyone sees them working hand in hand with the defense attorneys to guarantee an acquittal, if not get the case thrown out altogether. As black people, we see prosecutors working hand in hand with defense attorneys all the time. They just don't work hand in hand with ours. That's all. Now, while there are some of the usual rich and powerful hijinks going on here, what I'm trying to get across here is what happened in the Epstein case wasn't a matter of Epstein's cash so much as it was a matter of Epstein's color. Consider this. 2 years ago in Alabama, you had a high school coach, Spencer Jackson Byrd, who raped a 15-year-old student. He pled guilty to second-degree rape and engaging in a sex act with a 15-year-old. He was supposed to get 20 years for that, but under white supremacy, the law doesn't apply to certain people, so the court automatically started cutting him breaks right off the top. 20 years? Well, we think that those 2 10-year sentences of yours should be served concurrently. That means he serves both sentences at the same time. We're not going to have you serve them consecutively. Just because you raped a 15-year-old, that doesn't mean you should spend 20 years in prison. And then they decided, well, hell, even 10 years is too much for you. We're going to split that sentence, basically giving you 5 years, and you only have to serve 9 months behind bars. But even that 9 months, only 6 of those months are going to be actually in jail. The remaining 90 days, he only has to show up on the weekends. Now, I want you to think about that. Doesn't that sound like the same kind of deal that Epstein got? Oh, you're supposed to be looking at freaking football numbers of years in prison, but instead we're going to be cutting this down, narrowing it down. Oh, what is that? What do you mean 20 years? We're going to give you 18 months, and well, you only have to serve 13 months, and you only have to show up at nights for about the first year or so, and that's good enough for you. So here this guy is, he's supposed to get 20 years. Then they say, well, we're going to have you serve a 10-year sentence concurrently. Well, let's cut that in half. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and give you just 9 months and let you out in 6. Now, you hadn't heard of this Spencer Bird character before, had you? No big headlines about him, were there? If there was public outrage and outcry, you didn't hear about it, did you? Do you think that this guy had Alan Dershowitz representing him? You think he had some high-profile super lawyer representing him? You think that's how he got those sweetheart terms? There are a million little Jeffrey Epsteins running around. There's all kinds of scum and degenerates running around who have violated children, still doing so today, and nothing ever gets done about them because under white supremacy, there are certain people who the laws are not meant to apply to and will not apply to. This is not to say that it's not important who Jeffrey Epstein's high-powered pals are, but the point that I'm trying to get across is when people ask why isn't anything being done, it's because nothing ever gets done in cases like this. To ask why it is that all of Jeffrey Epstein's rich and powerful white pals are not being made to take depositions and they're not getting dragged into court and they're not getting hassled by the police, that's for the same reason every time some white supremacist with a badge harms a black person, you got all of their fellow thugs with badges standing around and nobody ever invokes the all-in laws. Nobody ever does that. You got some white supremacist harms a black person, nobody ever says, hey, he's going to have to go down, and all of his buddies who were there, they're as guilty as he is, they got to go down too. It doesn't work that way. It never works that way for certain people. So understand, the reason that Jeffrey Epstein was allowed to walk the first time wasn't because of his connections. It was because of his complexion. And pining away in the hope that Ghislaine Maxwell is going to be bringing these guys down, that's a fool's errand. This is not about Jeffrey Epstein's money. White supremacy is sophisticated. There's some black folks who try to cover up for their own powerlessness in the face of white supremacy by pretending, oh, it ain't sophisticated. Yes, it is. You're getting a world-class lesson in how sophisticated it is right in front of you. They can go ahead and make sure everybody knows exactly what happened to Epstein. So what? Nothing you can do about it. Well, this is about money. Yeah, you go on believing that. Now, it would be about money with you. You're the one who would need some high-powered lawyers to get you out of a situation when it's clear that you're innocent. But under white supremacy, there are certain people who, it doesn't matter if they're guilty of sin, they're not going to prison. So, as for Ghislaine Maxwell, what comes next? Well, it really doesn't matter. We can go ahead and give some predictions now that ultimately, whatever sentence that she gets, she's going to get some time in prison. But whatever it is, it ain't going to amount to her being there for the rest of her days. But even if it does, so the heck what? Who the hell is Ghislaine Maxwell anyway? Even if she was of a disposition to call herself naming names, and I don't think that she is, I don't think you should hold your breath on that one. So the hell what? TBA said power respects power, but to that I would add power also protects power. It has to. And when you're talking about people on the level of princes and presidents, when you get to power at that level, it's kind of like the exact same dynamics that you have with, say, Hillary Clinton and a Bill Clinton, or with Jada Pinkett Smith and a Will Smith. Why is it that nobody's breaking away from these relationships and such when everybody else would? And the reason why is these people don't have marriages, they have arrangements. That's how it works with power. It's never truly personal. Ghislaine Maxwell hitched her wagon to Jeffrey Epstein's star. She got herself a nice little paycheck, nice little elevator ride to the top, got to bump elbows with the rich and powerful, and indulge some of her debauched and depraved sadistic whims with children. It was a nice little ride, and now the ride's over. Now, I'm sure at this point, a lot of people are going to be having Ghislaine Maxwell on a death watch. How long before the feds decide she's a loose end that needs to be tied up? I mean, before she can't take it anymore and takes her own life. But of course, she's going to do just like Jeffrey and make sure those cameras aren't on, are they? You sure they're off? You sure they're off? I need my privacy while I kill myself. Though I would hardly be surprised if Ghislaine Maxwell, who up until now has actually been in good health, if she suddenly winds up having a heart attack out of nowhere, or if she suddenly dies from a stroke, or if she gets diagnosed with a sudden bout of cancer. Keep in mind, that's what happened to Hugo Chavez. The U.S. tried to overthrow him. That didn't work. Next thing you know, this otherwise perfectly healthy man mysteriously gets a case of stomach cancer and drops dead a few months later. How convenient. But as captivating as this whole sordid saga has been for a huge part of the population, for Black folks in particular, I don't want you to see something that simply isn't there. Yes, the money is there, the power is there, and it's easy to point to that because you're not lying. I mean, that's an easy distraction to point to because it's there. It's true, it's obvious, and it can't be denied. But what also cannot be denied is that Jeffrey Epstein is not some sort of extreme case. He's not some sort of anomaly. This was just business as usual. We can be disgusted, but let's not be surprised. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Cloud Walker Z, Maurice Soul, Michael Ray, Brian Ellis, and Roy Collins. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.